Alright, here we go. Terminator Dark Fate spoiler discussion review. I have already done a non-spoiler review here on the channel the night I saw the movie. It's been a few days now. I've given it more time to think about. And we're going to go into heavy spoiler territory here in this video. So I'm giving you a couple seconds right now. Click off if you don't want to be spoiled. Of course, the title will say spoilers on it, but people will still click because, I don't know, people will do it. Or maybe it's automatically going to play for you if you have that autoplay feature on YouTube. But again, you've had plenty of time now. Okay, let's get into it. Dark Fate spoiler reviews. Obviously, the first thing we have to talk about is the first, 5 minutes of the movie. John Connor gets killed. Okay, how do I feel about this? First of all, like I said in my non-spoiler review, the de-aging technology was great. That kid looked a lot like Edward Furlong, like young Eddie Furlong. That was really creepy, right? So we got to give him props for that. However, a lot of hardcore Terminator fans have been saying that it disrespects the original two films. It disrespects the importance of John Connor and how he basically is the ultimate MacGuffin of this whole franchise because he would become the leader of the Resistance, send his own father back in time to conceive him, and save the world from the machines at some point in the future. 2029, I believe, is the original year. Of course, that's been changed in subsequent movies. But remember, we're ignoring Terminator 3, 4, and 5. As far as disrespecting T1 and T2, I don't think anything can really disrespect those movies because they're so well made. If anything, Genesis really disrespected those movies if you want to go that far. But I didn't hate this, and I'll tell you why. I will tell you why I did not hate this. For a movie, Terminator 6, Dark Fate, that literally borrows ideas from Terminator 3, 4, and 5. We have hybrid human Terminators, with Mackenzie Davis. We have, the inevitable future from T3, as well as the Rev 9 Terminator having similar powers to the TX. There's things they borrowed from these movies. But I didn't hate it because when you look at creating this movie, right, there's only a few things they could really do. Like, we've already seen 3 sequels to Terminator 2. T3, T4, and T5. Rise of the Machines, Salvation, Genesis. You can't just do the same thing over again and have it be like, well, we're going to move it ahead in the timeline. We're going to do a reboot. We're going to have some weird time travel hijinks where they have 2 memories. So it would only somewhat make sense for the Sarah Connor character to continue if they do the one thing that she's been trying to get them not to do, and that is kill her son, whether it be before he was even conceived or after. And it actually makes sense, though. When you think about it, it actually does make sense. Why would Skynet not send back more than one Terminator? Yes, the T-1000 was a prototype, but he was, again, a prototype. They even say that in T2, advanced prototype. Why would you send back a prototype that's not even finished yet? See what I'm saying? Without sending back something that is finished, aka another T-800. So having Skynet send back multiple Terminators, to me, actually does make sense. Logically, from a computer standpoint, you want to have backups in case your main one fails. The T-1000 failed, so you have the other Terminators there that are being sent back in secret that nobody really knew about, happening. However, that does somewhat contradict what we have known in the old Terminator films as far as how the time travel happened. So the way that Kyle Reese explained it in T1 was that they had won the war, they smashed the defense grid, and their last ditch effort was to send the original T-800 from the first film back in time. That was the original last ditch effort, and they had blown the place up, and because of that, John Connor sent Kyle Reese back through the same time machine. It was the same thing. In Terminator 2, however, the timeline had been altered, obviously. It had been changed because of what happened in T1. And because of that, something else happened, a different event. Now, we don't know if, the Resistance had their own time machine or if the Skynet had multiple time machines and they had one in secret and were able to send back more Terminators. That part was weird, but what really didn't make any sense, and again, the logic makes sense, but there's time travel problems, is later on in the movie when Sarah Connor says, there's new Terminators popping up all the time, and I keep getting these text messages. We find out it's from Carl, a.k.a., the T-800 in this movie, Arnold, we find out from Carl that he's been giving her access to the Terminators and, you know, to help her kill them and whatnot. She's a Terminator hunter, right? That's fine. That's all well and good. But number one, okay, where did those Terminators come from? Was it the same Skynet future, just sent back to different points in the timeline? Is that what they were doing? Or was it from, obviously it wasn't from Legion, it was from Skynet. So that to me was kind of weird. Now, the idea that even though Skynet did not happen, that this war still did happen, actually makes perfect sense. Because, number one, even though Cyberdyne Systems was destroyed and blown up in T2, you've got to have offshore backups somewhere else. You've got to have backups of all that data somewhere. So that to me was very illogical, that it just would end everything from happening. But also, the inevitability of AI. Like, think about this. Like, we're living in a world now in 2019 where they have this thing I'm seeing promos for called Microsoft AI. And we're living in a world where AI is becoming a very real thing. And when you look at what we've done to this world, I'm not trying to get all PETA on you here, but we've done a lot of damage to this planet, and as humans. And the idea that an AI would control the weapon systems and eventually turn on us is somewhat realistic. As crazy as it may sound, obviously there's got to be some kind of button to stop it, but it does somewhat make sense if Skynet were to get smart, so to speak, you know, or whatever the case is. So the idea of artificial intelligence eventually being invented that actually has its own way of thinking is not that crazy. You see what I'm saying? It really isn't that crazy to think about, especially with how we've progressed with technology now. And I'm not saying it's going to happen. That's not what I'm saying. But it's not a crazy concept. It's not entirely. It's science fiction, but it's not complete fantasy. You see what I'm saying? So, obviously there's going to be a replacement. And in this timeline, it was Legion. And we don't really know exactly. Like, they went through some of the stuff about how it happened, but we don't really know the details of how it happened. You know, how Legion was formed. But there were issues, which I want to get to here in a minute, that I had with this movie. I had a lot of issues with it. I still enjoyed it. I had fun with it. But there's problems. Now, again, it makes sense. Having like a new resistance and a new enemy. But it kind of comes off, again, very uncreative. This was very, very uncreative. This felt like the Star Wars sequel trilogy. You've got the Empire, then you've got the First Order. It's the same thing. It's the same damn thing, okay? They have the same kind of tech, maybe a little bit better tech. They have their own Death Star, their own Star Destroyers, their own TIE Fighters. It's the same gimmick. Here we have Skynet, which eventually would become, or not become, but now in this version it's Legion. Same thing. They have their own Terminators, which would seem to be way more advanced. Their own tech seems to be more advanced. But it's the same gimmick. It's AI that wants to wipe out the world. Not that different. So it wasn't very creative. And again, it's the same formula from the other Terminator movies. Bad guy sent a Terminator back. Good guy sent a hero back. It's the same thing. T1 did it. T2 did it. This one does it. T3 did it as well. With this one, though, we then, again, like I said earlier, we find out that Skynet actually sent back multiple Terminators at different times of the timeline to try and kill John Connor at different points in his life and surprise, you know, I guess catch him by surprise, which is what happened. So that did make sense. I know Jeremy Johns was complaining about it, but it did make sense because they're trying to get that element of surprise, you know, and get him. Even though, again, it's a big giant man, but it's whatever. You know, but it makes you wonder, why didn't Legion do the same thing? Like, why didn't Legion think to send back multiple Terminators this time? I mean, that Rev 9, you know, the way it was described by Grace, you know, the future hero, was not that he was a prototype. She's like, oh, you don't kill it, you run from it, is what she said, right? So that implies there's multiple of these in the future. So if that's the case, it begs the question, why didn't they just send back 10 of them? You know, that was weird. Also, the thing about killing John Connor, and again, people are mad about it, I get it, I didn't hate it, I explained why earlier in the review, because they had to do something different. I get it. Maybe they shouldn't even made this movie. I mean, I agree. This movie should never even have been made, right? The next Terminator movie should have just been a future war film, ended with Kyle Reese going back in time. We're done. That's what it should have been. I've always felt that way from the beginning. Salvation was on the right track, whether or not you love or hate that film. Then Genesis screwed it all up, and then this, again, same thing. But different argument for a different day, right? The replacement hero for John Connor was, this girl, Danny, who, and again, there's nothing wrong with a female protagonist. Sarah Connor's a very strong female protagonist. She could have been the leader. She was the leader. The big twist in the movie, or one of the big twists, is that, you don't give birth to the leader, you are the leader. Which, by the way, I predicted that at the beginning of the movie, that would be the twist. The minute when Sarah said, let me guess, you're going to give birth to a kid, that's when I knew they were going to flip it. Again, predictable as hell. The movie was very predictable. That's one thing I will say. I was able to predict a lot of things that went on in this film before they happened. It's not that hard to figure out. It really isn't, which I'm okay with that. There's nothing wrong with that if it's done right. But the way they showed her, like, saving the kid Grace and, like, saying, telling those guys we have to work together against Legion and all that, she doesn't seem that threatening or that intimidating. And yes, we know that in this movie she gets trained by Sarah Connor on how to shoot and things like that. Like John Connor, she becomes the new John Connor. That's essentially the story. But, like, I just don't buy her. Like, she's a very nice looking girl, like a very chill person, it seems, but she doesn't have that, like, tough military, badassery like a Ellen Ripley or like a Sarah Connor. She doesn't have that. I'm not sensing that from her at all. That powerful leadership alpha female thing. I don't sense that from her. And we should have seen that, I think. I think they should have just done what they did in T2 and shown her with binoculars in the future, right? Just putting her binoculars down and showing like a scar over her eye or something okay, this is the leader, this badass chick. That would have been better. I think this came out, she doesn't look that threatening to be a leader. Like, that's the way I saw it. Now, the big problem I had with this movie, was what they did with the Terminator T-800 that killed John Connor, a.k.a. Arnold. I love Arnold, obviously. I love good guy Arnold in T2 and T3, even though he was cheesy as hell in T3. Big fan of this guy. But we've been programmed, no pun intended, that from Terminator 1, that these things can't be bargained with, can't be reasoned with. They have no pity, no remorse, and they will not stop until you are dead, right? Yes, John Connor did die. Theoretically speaking, the Terminator at that point, mission accomplished, would have shut down or what? That's not what happened here. What happened was he goes off and he just lives among the people. This is a killing machine who just lives among the people and just learns more about humanity, and over time develops a consciousness, a conscience, and a love of humanity to where he actually takes a family in and becomes like an adoptive father to a kid and becomes, a good guy. Which, if they reprogrammed him, if the storyline would have been that Sarah reprogrammed him, that would have been fine. Or, now if you're a real Terminator nerd, you would know about this, if they set his read and write chip to read and write. Because remember, whenever Terminator gets sent back, they only have the read chip, right? And there's a deleted scene in Terminator 2, which again, it's a deleted scene, so maybe it's not canon or whatever, where they open up Arnold's head and they flip the processor to being read and write, so he learns more about humanity. He becomes, he's a neural net processor, a learning computer, right? That's what he is. And he develops more of an understanding of humanity. But even that Terminator wasn't like a family man or anything like that. He didn't even understand why people cry. Like, none of that stuff. And that all made sense for T2. But for this movie, it's really hard to believe that this Terminator started a family. And there's even a line when Sarah Connor goes, "Did she never notice that you weigh 400 pounds? It's true. Like, you can't possibly live with a cyborg for 20 some odd years or 15 years or 10 years or however they lived together and not have been even somewhat suspicious that he was a cyborg. I just don't buy that. That was legit bad stuff. That was poorly done, if you ask me. I love Arnold. I love what he did in the movie. Him being a family man, a Terminator becoming a family man, makes no sense. Unless, again, they reprogrammed him. Nobody reprogrammed him. He was theoretically the same T-800 model that was sent back to kill Sarah, right? The same model with very little enhancements of anything. Same kind of processor. And that dude didn't care about shooting up anybody he could have. even though he was, of course, an espionage machine. I didn't like that. I thought it was really, really dumb, and honestly, that, I think, hurt the movie. I think that's the main thing that hurt the movie, is that logic flaw. You know, that was, to me, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, as somebody who's been following this franchise for a long time, that would happen like that. And they even show, like, a dog next to him. And, you know, if you know Terminator, you know that dogs always bark when there's Terminators around. They're good at spotting Terminators. But this dog warmed up to him somehow and stopped barking after a while, presumably. Like, I get that was the message, but it was so weird. It was so weird because I just don't buy it. I'm sorry, I don't buy it. I'm a fan of this franchise. I don't buy that. I don't buy that woman couldn't tell he was a cyborg way ahead of time. I don't believe that. And also the fact that he was saying that he gave Sarah Connor purpose, the way it's implied, and granted they explained it by him saying, you know, I had a son, I understood, but it's one of those things where it was almost as if he had guilt. You know, like he had guilt for what he did to John Connor. And it developed over time. And again, this is not... It's not impossible. It's just improbable. And it's also one of those things where if they had somehow figured out a way to, like, again, reprogram him or something, I would get it. But he's just a killing machine who, by being around humans for years, just learned to be empathetic and grow guilt. It's weird to me. It's weird to me. Plus, it does kind of make the end of T2 weird because, you know, the Terminator sacrifices himself, which it does, in Terminator 2, but now we know it could have just hidden somewhere in Texas with John and, Sarah forever and been a father to John, so that sucks. But it's not, that's different because that Terminator had grown an understanding of why Skynet was bad for the human race, whereas this one really didn't. It took years for him to learn that. So that's not that bad. But still, it sucks. Like, that part of it sucks. But overall, Arnold was great. Like, that's the thing. If you can ignore this kind of stuff and just kind of be like, all right, well, that's how it is. I guess he learned how to have empathy and guilt. Okay, then, yeah, it's fine, because Arnold is great, and he's awesome in the movie. Some really fun stuff with him in the film. Like I said in the non-spoiler, the scene where they were in the airplane, and then they went to the underwater was way too much. Too much stuff happened. It was very hard to keep track of. It was very similar to, like, the Transformers fights, that Venom fight, where you put too much on the screen, man. It does tend to kind of screw with your head a bit. It's just too much stuff going on. But I did like how, the end, the way they killed Rev 9, I like how everybody had to work together. Like, they all worked together to do it in that little laboratory thing. Grace had to sacrifice her life with little power cells, which they totally gypped from Terminator 3. So again, they're using ideas from other movies and incorporating them into this one, which takes away from this movie because it's not that creative. It's just the same stuff over and over again. The power cell, but I liked how the T-800 was physically as strong as the Rev 9 endoskeleton. Right, physically. Not as durable, obviously, because he was able to, do these crazy, weird body motions that the T-800 just couldn't do. Like some crazy yoga stuff. But, he's thing in his mouth, and I like, then he's like, for John, which was, supposed to be an emotional thing, and it kind of was an emotional thing that he sacrificed himself. But the T2 Terminator also did that. I didn't feel any emotion from it or anything like that. I guess I was supposed to. I personally didn't. But it takes a lot for something to really hit me emotionally. Like, when I watched Endgame and Tony Stark died, I did not cry. A lot of people in that movie theater were crying. I did not cry. Because it takes a lot for me to cry at a movie. I don't cry at movies that often. It's just me. It's just not that I don't feel the emotion. I definitely do feel the emotion. But I don't just cry at everything. It takes a lot. Something has to hit me hard. To make me cry. I think the last time tears actually came down my face during a movie was the scene where in Force Awakens with Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher when they first see each other. That scene, and they first see each other and they play the music, dun, 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 like that got me because it was the reunion of Han and Leia, and it just. And this is before Carrie died. Her dying probably makes it even more emotional. Like that scene, I actually had a little tear come out of my eye because. That was something that I never thought I was going to see. So that did hit me emotionally, but that was a happier thing more than a A sad cry. But anyways, it didn't make me cry or anything. And in fact, I don't know anybody in the theater who cried over the end of this movie. But it was well done. A couple sacrifices done, and there you go. The thing about the Rev 9 Terminator also, just to kind of go back to the Arnold thing, is it did show personality too, but I feel like that wasn't empathy. It was just he was doing that for infiltration purposes. If you study the lore of Terminator, the Terminators are, as they got more advanced, they're not just these robotic things. They show emotion, they say things to fit in to whatever environment they're in for infiltration purposes. So the Rev 9 Terminator had to be polite to other people. The reason why this thing didn't just go around killing everything, which people were like, why did it just kill things? Why didn't T-1000 just kill things? Because then you're going to end up creating a serious crisis, and you're going to have the military step in, the military drops a bomb on you, and you're done. See what I'm saying? Like, you don't want to... These Terminators are for infiltration. During the future war, they have plenty of situations like that. But during going to the past, you want to infiltrate. Infiltrate, kill. Kill your target. Kill anything that's in the way of your target, but don't just kill innocent people for no reason. That's just not how it works. And if you notice, it didn't really happen that way. It really didn't. The only one that kind of came close is when in T2 when Arnold's going to shoot that guy, and then he's like, "Put the gun down now!" That guy in the alleyway or whatever by the in that little parking lot area by the payphone. He was going to shoot the guy, but I guess he saw him as a threat. Whereas that's not really how they work. They infiltrate. No, that worked out fine. Gabriel Luna showed some charisma. He's not Robert Patrick at all, who did show a lot of charisma despite being a very bland to some. But he had that weird kind of charisma where the way he carries himself is cool. But it was some decent tech there, some decent stuff. We had another one of those, car chase sequences that all these movies tend to have. This one was okay. The music in this film, there was some throwbacks to the old soundtrack, a lot of that dun 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 dun, but not really any new pieces that I think stood out to me. It was just kind of there and whatever. The stuff with the future, and these kind of spider-like or whatever machines, robots, whatever you want to call them, was kind of cool. I was actually kind of hoping for a twist in the story where like the future war was actually being controlled by a human. There was actually a human antagonist. Maybe we'll see that if they make sequels, but I'll be honest with you, okay? I'm going to wrap up my review right now. This movie, again, I had fun with it, but it wasn't a great film at all. It was, again, probably the best one since T2, I think. Maybe equal to T4. T3 is fun also, but really does not age very well. I talked about this in my podcast recently. It just doesn't. But, I had fun with it. It did a lot of rehashing of older stuff we've seen in other movies, other Terminator movies, and just kind of melded them all together, and it's just not very creative at all. But there's only so many places you can take this franchise, and like I've said before, unless you're going to do an all-out future war movie that actually shows how the Resistance won the war, how they smashed the defense grid, and shows Kyle Reese going back in time, which they're probably never going to do at this point. I think that ship has sailed. But unless you're going to do that, this franchise needs to be over already. It's done. I mean, if you count Sarah Connor Chronicles, another T2 sequel, there's like 8 timelines by now or so. I don't know. I lost track. But novels too. Don't forget the T Infinity. But some of the comic book stuff is fun though. So anyways, either way, it's an okay movie, but probably not one I would rush out to see, even though I've said that in my non-spoiler. What'd you think? Tell me spoilers in the comments. Am I too nitpicky here? If I am, be honest with me and tell me if I am. If you think these are genuine gripes, let me know as well. Just my opinion of what bothered me and what I did like about the movie. Again, I didn't hate it, but it just... There's only so many places you can go with this franchise. Same thing with Star Wars. Like, we're just kind of... Redler and me talks about this a lot, We're doing the same thing over and over again here with these franchise reboots and things like that. Do something new and unique, if they can. If not, then it's whatever. And I don't want to see a reboot. I don't want to see a remake of... like a remake of T1 from scratch. I do not want that. Let it go. Let classic movies stay classic. Thanks again, and I'll talk to y'all soon.